Formado pela Universidade de Oxford, Peter Burke lecionou na Universidade de Sussex por 16 anos. Transferiu-se então para a Universidade de Cambridge, onde lecionou História Cultural. Até hoje, publicou 26 livros traduzidos para 31 idiomas. Ele veio a Ponta Grossa para o quarto encontro paranaense dos bibliotecários. E é com ele que eu converso agora. Hi, Professor Burke. Welcome to Brazil, and thanks a lot for receiving us for this interview. To start our conversation, I want to ask you, what is media?
Okay, so thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here in Brazil. And it's a short question, but it's a very big one. And so I go back to the original meaning. The media are the means of communication. So we are conversing in one medium, orality. Writing's another medium. Printing's another medium. Today many people think that the media are just radio and television. They are equally media, but they're only the latest in this increasing list. Well, now the internet, still another medium, and one we come back to with other questions, I think. Yeah.
Currently, much said about media manipulation of information. Historically, how can we describe this?
Yeah. So there is much concern today about the manipulation of information in the media. Can be visual, what happens to photographs and films and videos, but of course it can be manipulation of words. You take a phrase out of the context and it seems to mean something different.
How does this happen in journalism?
This has always been a problem ever since people communicated that sometimes they misunderstand one another, but sometimes they deliberately misunderstand. So it's not a new problem. It may be new in its scale, and this is like the problem of fake news. It's an old phenomenon, but there is a change of scale and a change of speed in recent years.
Why do fake news propagate so fast?
Yeah. If we're talking today, then it's because of, above all, Facebook. Not uniquely because of that. And we mustn't exaggerate the difference between speed now and speed before. Rumour has a long history, perhaps as old as speech. And long ago, already in the time of Shakespeare, people noted rumours propagate themselves at an incredible speed. And of course, they also become distorted. The children's game, I think they call it telephone. You whisper into the ear of one child who whispers into the ear of the next one. When you go round the circle, the message has changed, it's not recognisable. So at least in the age of Facebook, it's the same message that's being propagated at enormous speed. That's the biggest change, I think.
It's possible to talk about journalism and Facebook.
Yes.
How it happened?
Well, first people use Facebook just as if it's a way of writing short letters to one another. But then some people, including professional journalists, realize that if they write in this medium, they reach a wider public than if they write in the newspaper. And so, if you like, you have the invasion of a medium which originated for amateurs, and it's invaded by professionals. And there are people whose main occupation now is writing blogs. 20 years ago, they would have only written articles for newspapers and journals.
And about the fake news,
yeah.
How to combat fake news?
That's very difficult, but there are two strategies, one in the short term and one in the long term. Because in the short term, there has already been a reaction against this problem. And there are sites where you can go to verify the accuracy of a particular story. Maybe there aren't enough of these, and you have to know whether you can trust the sites of verification, but it is a step in the right direction. But in the long term, I think we have to look at schools, that you have to educate people to be critical. we didn't do it enough before. That is, I don't know how many schools teach people don't believe everything you read in the newspaper. Don't believe everything you see on television. Always exercise a critical faculty. Ask yourself, who is sending me this message? Do they have some kind of agenda? Do they belong to a political party, a religious group? Do they want to persuade me of something? It's always good to have these questions in mind. Now it's more urgent than ever. There's a phrase that was first used in the 1980s has become a proverb in English. In the 1980s, there was a major political scandal in Britain called the Perfumer Affair. That is, the Minister of Defence used to have a mistress, but he didn't know she was also the mistress of a Russian attaché, and so certain secret information was passed. And this girl, Christine Keeler, had another friend who also saw different kinds of man, and she said that in the inquiry that she'd had sex with a famous politician. And so in court, the defence for this politician says to her, he denies it. And her response became classic. Well, he would, wouldn't he? And now people use this phrase just to draw attention. Somebody says something, but you don't have to believe that. That person has a special reason for saying that. He would, wouldn't he? And that slogan helps to keep us critical. We need something like this taught in schools. Everywhere, of course, not just here. Yeah.
In your book, Os Ingleses, you talk BBC is a British institution.
Yes.
Why in Brazil we don't have TVs like institutions too?
Yeah. The BBC is an interesting example of an institution which is partly public, but it's not completely controlled by the state. We have lots like this. Oxford University, Cambridge University are like this. They have some state support, but they're not dependent directly on the state. That helps protect freedom of speech. And so if you want to have something like the BBC, it would need both support from outside, but a guarantee of independence. If you follow those rules, there will be no reason why you couldn't have a BBC. I don't know whether the BBC is unique because it's part of British culture. I'm not so sure about that. And policy of the BBC is to tell the public both sides of a question which is controversial. But other countries could adopt that policy for a state broadcasting agency. Maybe some have, I'm not sure.
In your book, Os Ingleses, you talk about the newspaper saying English.
Yes.
In Latin countries like Brazil, this number is much lower.
Yeah.
Is newspaper consumption a cultural manifestation?
Yeah, I'm sure this is part of the cultural history of our two countries. So in Britain, near universal literacy was established in the late 19th century. Now, in some countries that led to everybody reading books. Scandinavia has a much higher rate of book consumption than Britain. I think Iceland has the record. One might say it's cultural. These are very Protestant countries. One might say it's even ecological. These are cold countries with long dark nights, and at least before television, there wasn't very much else to do except read books in the evening. But in Britain, by contrast, it's a nation of newspaper readers much more than book readers. And so we have an enormous variety of magazines, newspapers, and so on. It helps to be a small country, because then we have national newspapers. And there's not a problem with the distribution, because the country is only the size of the state of São Paulo. So it's, yeah. So with Brazil, it's a big country. Universal literacy hasn't even quite been achieved, though it's very near now. And so people are more used to hearing news in a spoken way than to reading it. I would even say that where Britain is a culture where people like to read, this is a culture where people like to speak. And I noticed when I was teaching Brazilian students, they speak much better than British students. They're much more impressive when they speak. But if they then write something, no, it's not so impressive as English students of the same age. So this is cultural. There's a greater bias towards the written word in one country and towards the spoken word in another. So definitely the answer to your question is, at least in part, the explanation is cultural, but there are several different cultural factors involved.
You talk about the books.
Yeah.
Is the physical books
Yes.
Going to be all online in the future?
Yes, there's a tendency to put more and more books online. I know most of my own books have become e-books in the last few years. But now the question is does this mean the death of the paper book or not? And of course, I can't read the future. But I have to admit, what I want to see is the survival of the paper book, the printed book, alongside its new rival on Kindle or online, whatever. I take comfort from history because in the 15th century, when Gutenberg began to print these books with this new printing machine, many people who loved manuscripts were frightened. They thought this printed book is going to drive out manuscript culture. But it didn't. There was a situation of coexistence, even influence of the manuscript on print and influence of the print on manuscript. Eventually a kind of division of labour. So certain domains of communication were mainly manuscript, others were left to print. So what I hope for, indeed I expect with some degree of optimism, is the coexistence of online reading and reading from paper books that you still hold in your hand, you smell them, and you turn to the index, and so on. But of course, we can't be sure.
And the newspaper,
Yeah.
Going to the same way? Or
Much faster.
Much faster?
Because I don't know what's happening here, but several newspapers have closed the paper editions, most recently The Independent. I'm sorry about this. Of course, old people always say this, but I prefer the old-fashioned newspaper, which was enormous, complicated to hold open, and now even The Guardian has gone to this smaller edition. And I like touching newspapers, turning over the pages. I can survive reading online, but I don't enjoy it so much. But maybe the generation smartphone, the children born after the year 2000, who've grown up with online media. So there they are, touching these smartphones, and they can't even read yet, but they do it to see the pictures. Maybe they will have a totally different attitude to and they won't like the old media. We shall have to see what happens when they all grow up.
Other question, the Polish sociologist Zygmunt Bauman said the social medias like Twitter
Yes.
are a reflection of modern liquid world.
Yeah.
Do you agree with him?
I see a place for Twitter. I never use it myself, but I like the idea of a medium of communication where the people communicating are rationed to a particular number of words or even characters. And it's interesting to see the Pope uses Twitter. I'm not sure whether any earlier Pope thought of using this new medium. And I think because it's a literary genre of its own, marked with this extreme brevity, rather like the message that you send on the phone, except some people write a bit more. So I think there is an important place for it in the future. But I have to confess, I haven't adapted to this world myself. I'm perfectly happy with the traditional media, and I just go online to look at Wikipedia and maybe to look at a newspaper when I can't find a paper copy. Like 2 days ago, there was an interview with me in Chile in El Mercurio. So here in Brazil, and still less in England, I'm not going to find a copy of El Mercurio. But they gave me the link, I went online, I read it instantly. So even for people like me, there is some value in reading a newspaper online. But as I said before, when I can, I prefer to do it in the old way.
Yeah, and about the intellectuals and universities.
Yes.
What is the social function of universities?
The social function of universities for a long time has been double. It's both to find or produce new information and also to turn old information into knowledge. I like to use the metaphor of cooking. So information is raw data, but you have to work on it. You have to criticize it, you have to systematize it, you have to verify it, and then it becomes knowledge. And that's the old function of universities. But since about the 17th century, they have added the function of discovering or creating new knowledge. And I think these remain the functions of universities, whatever the media. Of course, today, universities have both a problem and an opportunity. Is the lecture obsolete? Is it sensible to have students get on a bus, go to the university, walk into a classroom, and sit for an hour while the professor talks to them? Couldn't they have recorded it all on television? Couldn't they just watch this on the smartphone? And so I think we could adapt. The professor speaking live still has a function, but maybe not to hundreds of people most of the time. Maybe when a professor comes from another country, then it's worth going to a room to listen. But if it's your own professor, it's better have 5 or 10 minutes with him just by yourself, and then the professor doesn't have to give the lectures in his or her own university, but has to have frequent informal meetings with a few students. And then for some purposes, maybe for teaching mathematics and for teaching a lot of science, and the student doesn't understand the first time. So it's very good. The student can sit in a room, maybe at home, and simply watch the lecture, and then if he or she doesn't understand, they just watch that bit again. So it's a much more flexible medium. It can adapt itself more to the needs of each individual student than the old system. So I don't think that means we can have a university without living professors, but they won't be used in quite the same way. And that will also reduce the price of a university education, and hence this great boom in the online university, what they call in English the MOOCs. I've even forgotten what the letters mean, but people talk about this. Once again, I don't think they drive out the traditional university. I think many universities may not survive, except in online versions. But a few universities, the centres of excellence all over the world, students will really want to be present in these places in person. But that's essentially to be able to have a conversation and ask questions of professors, especially if they become famous. So the map of universities is going to be very different in 20 or 30 years' time from now. The problems already arose around the year 2000, but it always takes time for institutions to adapt themselves, and we have begun to see this, but we haven't seen the end of the process just yet.
And what's the difference of the like public schools and state schools in England?
Yes, it's a very curious term, the public school, because it means private school in English. So there is this group of schools, and they charge high fees, actually very high fees. And then that means they can afford small classes, and they can afford to hire the very best teachers because they pay them more than the ordinary salary for a teacher. And so the people who study in the public schools have a better chance of entering good universities than people who are in the state system. So if you take two students who have the same intelligence, and then one has received a better teaching than the other, obviously when it comes to the entrance exams for a good university like Oxford, the one whose parents had the money to pay the high fees, that is successful. And it's more complicated than that, and if you like to say, it's less fair than that, because Oxford and Cambridge are divided into colleges, and the colleges, not the university, are the ones who choose the students. And I think every college, of course I only know one college from inside my college, they always favour the children of the old members. This is partly sentimental. A college is like a family. We like the idea that families over the generations send the children to the same college. But it's not just sentiment. We hope that the parents give money. Again and again, the people who give money to the college are the ones who used to study there. Now, in 1979, my college, like many colleges in Oxford and Cambridge, was only for men. And then there was a big debate, and one by one, the colleges opened to women. And this was a great progressive move, because whereas the population of Oxford and Cambridge students, when I was a student, 90% male, 10% female. Now it's 50% male, 50% female. So that's progress. But in the debate, neither the people in favour nor the people against colleges going mixed, none of them saw an unintended consequence, because the old members of colleges have as many daughters as they have sons. And so we double the number of the children of old members. So, and that leaves less space for people who come from a totally different background, but they're bright, they want to study in a good university. And this is a problem which hasn't been solved. I would have preferred that the college only choose people on merit, on promise. Somebody looks as if they're going to do well, then we want that one. But I'm in a minority. So it's difficult to know when this is going to end.
About the women in university, and I want to say, I want to ask, what's the function of feminism in modern societies?
Yeah, in the 1970s, that was the time when the feminist movement was at its height in Britain and I think parts of Western Europe. And one of the most obvious and rapid results of feminism was this opening of the traditional universities to take more women, and also enlarging of the possibilities for women to become professors in good universities. It had started in the 1920s. You see a few female professors in Britain, and I think more in the United States. But the whole scale is different now. And still, in Cambridge today, women professors are a minority. But that's only because when we are chosen, we can teach for 40 years. And so you have to wait for all the old men to retire, because now, in the competition for the replacement, a woman has at least a 50% chance of being chosen. I think very often she has a 60% chance of being chosen because people are anxious to redress the balance. But it means that maybe not for another 20 years will half the professors in Oxford and Cambridge be women.
In Brazil, we have other panorama about this.
Well, there's another paradox here, because when I was briefly teaching at USP, I noticed that in the humanities there were many more female professors than there were male professors. Now, since I happened at that point to be married to a female professor who was still teaching at USP, I knew the answer to this question, which is that when they taught and they went home, somebody else had cooked the dinner. That was the empregada. And so we have a paradox, like that paradox of what is progressive and what is not. You have more females in Cambridge, but then you have more children of old members. And in Brazil, the progressive idea that many professors are female was sustained by what looks from outside like a survival from the age of slavery. You have a woman who is living in a small room in your apartment, and she's cleaning and she's cooking and serving the dinner and washing the clothes and ironing the clothes, which is unthinkable in England unless you're a billionaire. And so the difference between the two countries, it has a complicated social explanation.